Hello friends, welcome to my channel and welcome to this video where I introduce you to the way I love to make my sourdough loaf, the way I get my ideal sourdough loaf every time. And I'm just taking my sourdough starter out of the refrigerator the night before I actually mix up the dough. I'm just going to set it on the counter with a little breathable top. I use a little paper towel, like a square of paper towel and rubber band, and it's a nice breathable top. And then tomorrow we'll begin the process of actually mixing the dough and everything. So I hope you enjoy this video.
Alright friends, I had a bit of a newbie experience here, even though I'm not technically a newbie, but I was pretending like I was, giving you all the information on how to take care of Myrtle here, my sourdough starter, and I didn't have the camera recording. So, my bad. Let's start over, but there are some things that I will have to explain as we go a bit. Okay, Myrtle here rose overnight. She rose to this level overnight. And I originally had more of a starter base in here. I had the starter base about up to here. So Myrtle rose another about ½ inch overnight is what I'm trying to say. I had an extra starter base because I was thinking I was going to make more stuff with my sourdough starter than I actually was. But because I'm just making one loaf of sourdough bread, I really don't need that much. So I got rid of some of the discard. Discard is what you call an inactive sourdough starter. This is inactive at this point because it has not been recently fed. I fed Myrtle before I put her in the refrigerator several days before, and I have not actively fed her since. And so once it's stopped rising and gone back down, that's an inactive starter. So this is where the inactive starter line is, or was, I should say. And I took it back down to where this rubber band was. I just disposed of that sourdough discard, took a couple spoonfuls out, and we are here. This is our starting point. The reason why I took it down was because, like I said, I'm not making as much, but the more inactive sourdough starter you have as your base, the more you have to feed it when you want it to become active and bubbly. And I didn't necessarily want to feed it a bunch of extra flour that I wasn't going to be using. So I just felt like I'd be wasting less if I took it down some. So at this point, I would probably, if I want this to double up, listen you guys, you can go based on measurements, but I'm telling you based on my experience of what I've done. I am just going to feed this with about 30 grams of flour, about 30 grams of water. Not quite, I'll explain a little bit more as we go here, but that will get it to double in its rise. And you'll be able to see that, like I said, around the edges here, because I will be scraping these edges down. But let me first show you the consistency of this now so you can see what it's like versus what it will look like later once it's active. By the way too, if I didn't explain this earlier in my video at the start of it, I put this little top on. You can buy these tops, these breathable tops if you want, but this is just a partial paper towel and rubber band. It's very effective and very cost effective. So this is what I recommend if you don't want to spend an arm and a leg for a fancy little top that does the same thing. All right, my sourdough starter, like I said, is very liquidy. It's just kind of running off the spatula. It's a very loose pancake batter. When you mix up the flour and water, when we feed it, we want it to be more of a little bit thicker of a pancake batter type consistency. This is pancake batter that I would say has sat out too long. So I have here a scale. I'm going to set my jar on there and zero out the weight. So just turn it on. It's not going to calculate the weight of the jar or anything like that. And I have bread flour, I have all-purpose flour, and I have whole wheat flour. Now, you could choose any of these to feed your sourdough starter with, but I have found that I like to mix and match, not at the same time, but I will feed it different flours at different times. And I have done all-purpose flour most recently. I've done the wheat flour before that, so I'll probably switch over here to the bread flour. Now, I will be baking my loaf in the future with all three of these flours, so that's why I keep them on hand. If you choose not to bake with all three of these flours, if you choose to follow a different recipe, you don't need to have all three of these flours on hand. Just use what you have on hand. I do feel like Myrtle, like I said, that's the name of my sourdough starter if you aren't familiar with that, but I do feel like Myrtle grows the best, feeds the best when I use either the bread flour or the whole wheat flour. So that's just something that I have noticed. But we're going to, like I said, use the bread flour. I just have a clean spatula here, and I'm going to measure in 30 grams of the bread flour. Oops, I got a little overboard here. I don't know, I was distracted. So we have 33 grams. not a big deal. I have some water in a pitcher now, and I'm going to measure about the same amount. Mine is still at 33, so I want it to be around 66 grams, but I'm going to go just a bit shy of the water measurement. And then I'm going to mix it. Thought I was gonna go a bit shy. You guys, I never do this. I never get this rambunctious with my measurements here. All right, even though I got a bit heavy-handed with my water, we're just gonna mix this up, see what the consistency looks like. Like I said, I was supposed to shoot right at 66 grams of water and flour all together based on how much flour I initially put in. I was going to go a little less. I was going to go around like 64 grams total then with the water, because I just feel like usually this feeds a little bit better off of a little thicker, a little less water, a little thicker base. But we're going to see the consistency. This is actually looking pretty good. This is much thicker of a base here. You can kind of see like that's sticking to the spatula a lot more. This is a thicker pancake base, and I actually like the way it looks. The bread flour and the wheat flour will take more water, so that was another reason why I wasn't overly concerned here. I'm just going to kind of clean off my spatula with my finger. If you're not comfortable with that, don't worry about doing that, but I am. Hands are clean. I'm just going to kind of clean out that spatula a little bit. I'm going to wipe the sides of my jar as best as I can, just to kind of remove where the sourdough had risen before, so I can see sides of my sourdough jar a little bit better. Just scraping the edges of it. All right, now this is fed. I'm going to roll this rubber band up to our new line of where we are starting. You can see our new line. So this will help us indicate when this rises where we started at. I'm going to cover up the starter, and I'm going to put it back in the corner of my little kitchen counter. Gonna let it sit there for about 4, maybe 5 hours till it doubles. Our house right now is at 74, but we have the thermostat set for 75. It's summertime. We're comfortable with that. I know a lot of people like their house cooler, but anyways, it rises faster in the summertime. Typically, our house is set for 75 in the summertime and 72 in the wintertime. I usually put this in a warmer area of my house, so I do have areas of my house where they get warmer in the summer versus the winter and everything like that. I'm gonna put this in a warmer area of my house so she will rise better. If I want to hurry the rise, if it has still not risen by like 4 or 5 hours, if it hasn't doubled in size and volume, then I have a trick. I turn on my oven and I get it as low as it will go, so to about 100 degrees, and I prop it open, and maybe I let it cool off just a little bit too, but I prop it partially open and I tuck her in there, and I just give her a little extra warmth just to get a little more action going. You don't have to do that. I don't know whether I'm going to do that today or not, but like I said, I'm going to let this rise for about 4 or 5 hours. I have some errands to run, and then by then, hopefully she will have doubled in size and we can begin the next steps of our bread making process. I started this process about 7 o'clock, but by the time she's actually fully fed and put over on the side, it has been 7:30. It doesn't normally take that long. Like I said, I thought I was filming the first time and I wasn't, so I had to redo this. But it is 7:30. I will mark that time down. I will mark the times down in the description box if you're curious throughout this whole process, if it helps you, but you don't have to be super strict with it. Just go with how your sourdough is looking, and hopefully you get more comfortable with recognizing the different stages as we go along and as you go along in your sourdough journey. All right, it's about 11:15 and we are getting ready to start up mixing our sourdough bread. And so it's a very simple thing. All you need, one more ingredient, let me grab it. Salt. Basically what you need, water, flour, salt, and you're gonna have yourself a tasty loaf. But I have Myrtle here. She has already risen. She's still, I would say, about doubled in size, but she has risen a little higher and started to fall. Now, it's not the end of the world. Usually I like to catch it at its highest peak, but even if you do it after it's fallen a little bit, she's still active, but at this point, she's actually hungry. So it's actually a good time, because when you mix it in with the rest of the flour and the water as well, then you're kind of like refeeding it and everything like that. So she should be ready to eat again, basically is what I'm trying to say. All right, so I have my water here. I want 325 grams of warm water, not hot, just warm. And I'm just measuring it out. I have my scale here. It's going to take most of this 1 cup measuring thing, but probably not quite all of it. I've never measured it out specifically to see if 1 cup equals that. I just go by the weights of grams. All right, like I said, I have a little bit left over, but we have 325 grams of warm water. I'm going to put Myrtle to use here. Let me show you what she looks like. She is active and bubbly, and I will get my spoon in here, and you can see it's kind of like thickened up. There's like some, I don't know how, like you can see the air bubbles in it and everything like that, but I need to stop playing around with her and just put 100 grams in here. I want at least 120 grams of starter. If I go a little bit above that, it's not the end of the world, but we are right at it, and now just a gram or two above it, so perfect. You can see that didn't leave me much, but it's fine. It's gonna be plenty. I'm gonna feed this later here after I get this dough mixed. I'm going to take my rings off, but at this point, I like to just mix it up with my hands. Just mix up with my hands. If that bothers you, you can take a dough whisk, but I personally hate cleaning the dough whisk, so I find it's just easier to do this. So basically, I've just broken up a few of the clumps of the starter into the warm water, and now I'm ready to start bringing in my flour. I'm going to start with the all-purpose flour. I'm going to do 250 grams of the all-purpose flour. This is not my recipe, by the way. This comes from Farmhouse on Boone, so I will definitely link that below, but I have really enjoyed this recipe. I find it to be very, very soft, very, I don't know how to, I'm trying to focus here on my measurements because I don't want to go above for this. All right, we're almost there. Pay attention, Jody. All right, 250 grams of the all-purpose, like I said. We're going in with bread flour next. We're going in with 125 grams of the bread flour. And yes, I'm just sticking my hands in here. It's okay. I'm not a germaphobe. All right, like I said, 125 of the bread flour. The whole wheat flour is next, and this is going to be just 100 grams. Once again, 100 grams of the whole wheat flour. And now for the salt. The recipe calls for 10 grams. Honestly, I like a little less. So do what you like, but about 10 grams of salt. Once again, I'm going to take my hands and just mix this up. You can use the dough whisk. I just personally prefer my hands. Like I said, I hate cleaning that dough whisk. If you have sensory issues, this may bother you, and it's not my favorite thing at this point, but it's not that bad. And you know, the hands clean up just fine. They're easier for me to clean than the dough whisk. Now, I like to mix the salt in last or at the end. You know what, actually, her recipe, I think, calls for different techniques of mixing the salt in. I just know that you don't want to do the salt right after having the water and the sourdough starter, that it can cause some weird texture to start to form. I've never experienced it because I've never done it in that order, but I always put my salt in after I put my flour in and everything like that, so it's not having direct contact with just the water and the starter. But you can see this is a very shaggy dough. I think the Farmhouse on Boone recipe calls for you to like put the salt in after the first stretch and fold. I'm not 100% sure on that. It's been a while, but this works for me. This has been working for me. Now I'm just working this a little bit. You don't have to work it much. I mean, it's going to be a shaggy dough. There's nothing you can do about it. Cleaning my fingers off a little bit because I want to save that dough as much as I can of it. And then I'm going to cover this bowl with a shower cap and let this sit for about 30 to 40 minutes. Usually a little bit longer for the first stretch and fold, but I'm not police on how long you wait for your stretch and folds. Just do what works into your schedule. That's the beautiful thing about sourdough. You just work it into your schedule. If you're a little early for one stretch and fold and a little later for another stretch and fold, it's going to be fine. I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to feed my starter. All right, I have everything zeroed out on my scale. I'm going back in with the all-purpose flour because I just did the bread flour this last feed. And I'm going to do, since there's not that much in there, I'm going to do about 20 grams of the all-purpose flour. And I'm going to do a little less than 20 grams of the water, if I pay attention here. All right, we're just 3 grams shy. Let's mix this up. Once again, I'm looking for that pancake-like consistency. And she's actually pretty thick. So I'm just gonna go in with some more of that water to get that same consistency that I showed you the first time. Now, a lot of times at this point, I would just put this back in my refrigerator. So before doing that, I would transfer it to a clean
mason jar, but I think I'm going to bake with it again tomorrow. I think I want to make another loaf for someone else. I could make 2 loaves at a time if I hadn't, you know, reduced my sourdough starter in the first place. And that's why I had initially considered, but I didn't want to throw you guys off. I just wanted to show you, I didn't want to throw myself off, to be truthfully honest. So I just wanted to show you how I actually do it with just 1 loaf at a time. But like I said, I think I want to make another loaf for someone else tomorrow. So I am going to leave this out on my counter, and I have fed it for the day, and I will feed it again tomorrow. And that should be enough. I don't know. I might not have quite enough for tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see. I might have to wait another day before I can make another loaf, but we'll get it done. And then after I make that other loaf, before I put this in the refrigerator, basically is what I'm trying to say, I will change this over to a clean jar and get this one cleaned up. Usually I make 1 loaf a week, and I clean my jar about once a week. So if that just gives you a little idea as to how often, there's no set time frame, but I don't think you want to let it go terribly long. All right, it is 12:05. I've had some technical issues. I have done my first stretch and folds, my friends. The dough is still shaggy, and the more you stretch and fold it with each time, it builds up a little bit more of that stiffness to it, if I want to call it that. So I'm going to let this rest again, and I'll do my best to make sure I have the camera on this next time. The dough was still really shaky though, like I said, when I started this stretch and fold, and it will start to come together more with each stretch and fold that I do. Hey, Editing Jody here. There's something I do want to make note of. One, I'm not technically editing right now. I'm in the middle of a curly hair video, but that's besides the point. As I was editing the sourdough video the other day, I noticed I had lost one of my clips of my second stretch and fold. I don't know what happened to it. I can only guess that as I was transferring the files that somehow I missed transferring that one and it just disappeared. There's a chance that I forgot to hit the record button, but I was pretty careful about that. Anyways, somehow I did not get the clip of the second stretch and fold. I apologize. I really wanted to show you the texture of the dough as I was going along with the different stretch and folds throughout the day. But the first stretch and fold I did at 12:05. Second stretch and fold I did at 12:40, and then I moved on to the third stretch and fold, which you will see here in a minute, and that was at 1:15. So you can see my spacing isn't perfect, but I talk more about that as we go in the video. So sorry about that mishap with this video, with that clip. If I could go back in time and change it, I definitely would, but I hope you continue to enjoy the rest of the video. Friends, it is time for the 6th fold, and I think this is going to be our final stretch of fold. So I don't go by the numbers. I don't go by strictly 6. I don't go by strictly 4 or however many like a recipe might call for. I just go by the feel of my dough. First, I need to get my hands wet though. I have been doing all these stretch and folds for you with my left hand, but I prefer to do it with my right hand. But anyways, as you continue to do these stretch and folds, the more that you do, the more resistance that the dough picks up. That is, as far as I understand, the gluten's developing. And earlier in my stretch and folds too, I also did a kind of like beat or spank the dough, however you call that. Like I just kind of slap it a bit here like this. I have not found any directions that call for that necessarily. Haven't been looking for directions that call for that, but I just made it up on my own. I feel like it gives my dough a little bit more spring, a little bit more rise in the oven. Could be, just be imagining that, but it's very satisfying to do. So I'm gonna continue to do it, although my hands are drying out, so I probably better stop doing that. All right, I do think that the dough is in a good spot though. I am going to let it do its rise. Let me wash my hands off though. So I'm going to let it do its bulk rise. This is what she's looking like right now. Pretty average looking loaf. We do have a nice little air bubble forming there, but during the bulk rise, it will get more of an air bubble. I went to about double in size. And then I'm just gonna put the shower cap back on. Based on the temperature of your kitchen, you know, this time will vary, but I'm gonna guess it's gonna take between 2 to 4 hours. So I'm just gonna set this aside for now. And like I said, check back maybe 2 to 4 hours. I'll let you know. All right, and our dough has doubled in size, I would say. She's looking good. All right, so I have a Banneton basket, and this is just one of these, I don't even know how to describe these other than that they're a Banneton basket. You can get these in Amish country or very easily on Amazon. Probably Walmart carries them as well, like online. And this has like a little linen lining. I believe this is linen. And so this does come off and everything like that, so you can clean it. I always wash my lining by hand. But what we are going to do is we are going to transfer this loaf into this basket. Instructions usually recommend using a rice flour, but I already have 3 different flours for like mixing up this dough, and I'm not about to purchase another flour. So I just use all purpose and it works. It works fine. I'm just gonna sprinkle a very little amount in my basket here. Set that off to the side. Give myself some flour on my counter for working space here. I am going to tip the dough out onto the counter and just kind of shape it. If you find that your dough is very like sticky, a very moist dough and hard to work with, you can let it sit on the counter for, 15 minutes or so. Just kind of let it get a little bit of a, I don't know, skin to it or whatever you want to call it. I used to do that in the very beginning, but I don't really worry about it now. Just gonna get a little flour on both my hands. I'm going to pull this apart kind of, just stretch it out a little bit. And then I'm going to work on folding in the corners. There are multiple ways that you can do this, but basically what we want to do is fold this wet part of the dough in on itself, and we want to create some tension. So I'm going to just fold the corners in, like I said, nothing fancy here. There's another little like wet corner here and one here. So I'll just keep folding that in, and I'm also going to roll it. This is going to create more tension for the loaf. And then I'm going to just work on taking some of this extra flour, patting it all over. I'm going to pull this towards me. I'm just going to keep spinning it and pulling it towards me. This is creating the tension, and I will once again get a little bit more flour if my hands are sticking to the loaf at all. Now, a lot of people work with a little metal scraper and, work the dough that way. I'm just most comfortable doing it like this. So learn what you're most comfortable with. Look at other YouTube videos online and see what you like about theirs and what feels good to you, what feels natural. And we got a good amount of tension there. I'm going to plop this into my Banneton basket, and now I need to work on sealing this up. So I'm just going to work on crossing it over, and I did take time to reposition my camera, so it does work better when you work fast, so you don't let it like dry out a little bit like it was doing. So if you work faster, just kind of pinch it together, and it doesn't have to be perfect. This is going to be the underside of your loaf. Some people are really particular about getting this all like perfectly sealed up. I haven't found that it makes a huge difference. This is getting a little tacky on me, but there we go. We're pretty well sealed. Doesn't look like the loaf is going to unfold on itself. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this excess flour here and pat my loaf. And I actually think I'm gonna have to get a little bit more. Just sprinkle it on here. Once again, I'm going to put this plastic cover over top of it. I'm gonna stick this at the coldest part of my refrigerator, so I'm gonna stick this in the back. and I'm going to let it sit overnight. Now what I could do is I could just let this sit in the refrigerator for about an hour or two, and then it kind of firms up a little bit, and we could take it out and begin the next part of the process, which I will show you tomorrow. But I could bake it basically tonight is what I'm saying. I would recommend leaving it in the refrigerator though, because it's just going to, like I said, kind of set up a little bit, and if you did want to continue to bake, then you could do the scoring easier once the bread's been in the refrigerator. If you try to score it now, it's not the easiest from what I have been told. I've never personally tried it that way, but it's only like 5 o'clock, a little after 5 o'clock when I started this process, and so I could technically bake this tonight very easily. But if I put this in my refrigerator, let it sit overnight, it's going to develop a little bit more of that sourness, and you could let this sit in your refrigerator for a few days. I've heard of people letting it sit in the refrigerator for almost a week and then baking it. It's just going to develop more of that sourness to it. I've never gone past a day personally, and I don't think I would, just because I don't know that I would care for too much more of a sour taste to it, but that's just my personal preference. Feel free to give it a try, obviously, whatever, you know, suits your taste buds and everything. Quick check in here. It is the following day. It is about 10:30, and I'm going to be getting ready to bake the bread. I'm also in the middle of doing something else, and that is the wonderful thing about sourdough, is I feel like you can do so much in between. Like the previous day when we were doing the stretch and folds, I was working on my computer in between those, and I was doing some other tasks around the house. You can just work it in. Obviously my stretch and folds weren't timed at exactly half an hour or 45 minutes or anything like that. I just kind of did it when I thought of it and tried to keep it in mind and everything, and it didn't even take the whole day. It did take several hours, but a lot of it was hands-off time. Like when I was waiting for the starter to rise initially in the jar, I was running errands at that time, so it wasn't any hands-on work. The most hands-on time was when I was doing the stretch and folds, and like I said, I could still do stuff in between. And then for the bulk rise, you had another couple hours where you're really not doing anything, and even in the winter, it's probably going to be colder in your house. I guess it all depends on what you like to keep your house temperature at, but for us, it's definitely colder in the house, so it takes even longer for it to rise. But all that to say, we are here because an important part of getting sourdough ready is I need to get my oven preheated. I'm going to turn my oven on to 475 here in a minute, but I do have a pretty large cast iron Dutch oven. Why did that elude me, that title, that name? I don't know. Sometimes that happens. But this is a large, it says an extra large, 7.5 quart. I'm not an expert on Dutch ovens, so you know, do your own research on that. One thing I have found that I really enjoy with baking sourdough is to have these little ceramic baking beads in here. These are just little ceramic pie weights, and I use the brand, it's Mrs. Anderson. I got these on Amazon for like a little over $6, so very affordable. This is just one package. Honestly, I could stand to have 2 packages, I feel like, but I'm getting by with just 1 package. I'm gonna put both the baking beads and this cast iron Dutch oven in the oven while it's preheating for 475. Some people swear up and down that you need to leave your Dutch oven preheating for like an hour just to get warm before you actually put your loaf in there. But you guys, I have not found that to be the case. Just leave it preheating for however long it takes your oven to preheat, and it should be up to temperature if your oven's up to temperature. Makes sense in my head like that, and it's worked out for me. I do, however, have to take out one of my racks to fit in my Dutch oven. And there we go. She's on, getting warm, and I can finish doing my other task, finish the rest of my hair video. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little parchment paper and just all-purpose flour, and I'm going to get this prepared for my boule to come out. When I say my boule to come out, I mean for it to come out of the refrigerator and to put it in my Dutch oven. I'm just going to sprinkle a little flour on this. I have my boule here that I pulled out of the refrigerator, and I am going to just take a little bit of flour and lightly dust this. I do have my boule here that I just pulled out of the refrigerator. I'm going to take this and lightly dust the bottom. It will be going on here, but I'm just gonna put a little bit more flour on it. She's gotten a little bit damp sitting in the refrigerator. The time is about 11 o'clock, so it is later than what I normally do this. So my sourdough has been sitting in the fridge a little bit longer than I normally do. I'm just gonna plop that down there, sprinkle a little bit more flour over top, just kind of rub it in, lightly laze it on, I should say. Next is this little cutting device, and I wish I knew the name for it, but I don't. It is very, very sharp, so be careful when you pull this cap off if you have one that has a cap. If you don't have one that has a cap, be even more careful because your blade is open and exposed and easy to cut your fingers. One time I pulled like this, like from the bottom of this cap thing, and sliced both of my fingers here. That was a very painful process. But anyways, I am not fancy with decorating with my scoring, but we're gonna give it a try, okay? We're just going to, usually I just do a line. Like I just do a plain line here, nothing fancy. This actually doesn't feel like it has quite as much resistance to it as it sometimes does. This main cut here is more deep than these side cuts. These are just for decoration, but the main cut is for actually venting, so your loaf doesn't explode. It can let out steam. All right, that's a very poor job in doing decorative scoring, but you get the point. This one is the primary one that we absolutely need. I just like to try to get these little ceramic balls to kind of be more in the center. Sometimes they shift as I pull this thing out. Place the loaf in there, lid back on, and back in the oven for 20 minutes. 25 minutes, actually. I'm gonna do 25 minutes. When the 25 minutes is up, then I will just take the lid off and I will reduce the heat to 450, take the lid off and just let it bake for another 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, just depending on how brown you like your loaf. And that is pretty much the process. Now you guys, I gotta say, I'm nervous because what if this loaf doesn't turn out as good as my others have? Because, you know, I'm doing it for video and I just feel like sometimes when you do things for the camera, they just don't turn out as well. And I feel like this loaf, while it wasn't bad, I just feel like it didn't have as much spring to it, or as much, like when I was cutting into it, when I was, ooh, don't want to cut my counter. When I was cutting into it though with this little knife thing, I didn't notice as much, like it was a little bit harder to cut, for lack of better words. It just was a little bit harder to cut through. When my loaves are the best, I found that it is really easy to cut with this knife. So that's why I'm a little bit nervous, but we'll see. Time will tell, huh? Let me get this stuff cleaned up though. All right, the 25 minutes is up. Let's see what our loaf is looking like. I don't want to pull that out any further. I'm afraid it'll drop it. Okay. She doesn't need very long, I don't feel like. I don't even know that she'll need the full 5 minutes. Honestly, she's looking better than I thought. Is she a perfectly round loaf? No, not exactly. But she looks like she had pretty good rise, so I am happy with this. Now the oven rack that I had pulled out earlier comes in handy as a cooling rack, and what I like to do is I like to butter this, and to me it gives it a softer crust. Now if you like a more crispy crust, by all means leave your bread in longer, do not butter it when it comes out, and you will have the crispiest crust that you possibly want. Another thing that will give you a crispier crust, and I forgot to mention this, was these baking beads actually, I believe, help keep the bottom of the crust, ooh, I have to pull it off. They help keep the bottom of the crust from getting so hard, because before, this would get very hard on me, the bottom crust. And these ceramic beads just help keep it so it isn't on the direct heat as much, I guess is what I want to say. I do love the way a loaf looks like when it comes out, when it has that slightly floured crust, and you can see the design on it a little bit better. The butter kind of hides that. It definitely hides it, but I love the texture of it, and I believe it adds more flavor too. I am not shy with the butter, by the way, if you couldn't tell. I'm going to let this cool several hours, probably closer to like three hours probably is good. All the instructions that I have seen say don't cut into it until it is fully cool, although I would love to, and I have done it when it's not as cool as it should be, when it's most of the way but not all the way cool. From what I understand, the biggest problem with that is probably that the steam that's still trapped inside this loaf is going to be able to evaporate more. So that is the only thing that I can see that would be a problem with it necessarily. I'm gonna try to get the bottom of this without burning my fingers, but I don't put much butter on the bottom, just a little bit here. Some people prefer to put ice cubes in their Dutch oven rather than like the baking beads. I think that's a pretty common thing for people to do that, but I have done that in the past actually. But like I said, I just prefer the baking beads method the best. I feel like it gives me the most desirable crust for my taste. All right, so like I said, I am going to let this sit for about another 3 hours, and I will come back and show you when we cut into it.
All right, my friends, it has been about 3 hours for this loaf, and so I am excited to cut into her. The one thing that I did differently this time from all my other times of baking sourdough is that I did leave it in the refrigerator probably about an additional, I would say 5 to 6 hours. Maybe even a little bit more than that if I think about it. But anyways, we're gonna see what we have here. By the way, I do have a bread knife, but I just feel like this vegetable knife does a little bit better job. Cut with your own bread what you want. All right, my friends, let's take a look at her. Oh my goodness, let's see that squeeze that they do. Yes, it's gonna be so good. Oh, it smells so fragrant. And of course, we can't forget the most important part, the taste test. Bon appetit. You guys, this is so soft here. This part right here, like the flesh of the bread, the crust is crusty, but it's not like chewing shoe leather, which I have had with sourdough before. Not mine, because that's not how I like it, but this is ideal for me. Now the sourdough crust will get more crusty as the days go by. That's just the way sourdough is. Now the way that I like to store my bread is I like to store it in these giant oven bags, and regular bags weren't big enough for my giant bowl-sized loaf. That's what they call this round shaped loaf basically. So these have been working. They are giant, and I do like wash them and reuse them for several times until I feel like I can't. So I'm not like wasting these every time, and it's something that I always like to keep on hand for other things as well. They do make other methods of storing your bread, but I find that using this type of bag tends to keep the crust a little softer, a little longer. So I will put these cut sides together so they try to kind of keep the air from getting to them. Get as much of the air out of the bag as I can, twist, and tuck it underneath, and there we go. I have this for another day. So for those of you who have expressed interest in my sourdough technique, my recipe that I use, and the steps that I follow thereafter, I hope this was helpful to you. I hope you enjoyed it. For anyone who has already dipped their toes into sourdough and want to try some of the different techniques that I do, give it a shot. What can it hurt? And for those of you who are new to sourdough, haven't started, or are just getting ready to start, maybe you'll find this helpful as well for tips and tricks to how to make your sourdough, at least the way that I like it. A soft, rather light, airy, fluffy loaf of bread. Obviously, I only have a half-eaten slice here now, pretty much. I've been chewing away at it. Once again, though, this is not my personal recipe. I did get this from Farmhouse on Boone, so once again, I will leave that recipe linked down below in the description box. For all the measurements and all the references, you can get it there. And until I see you again in the next video, have a nice day, friends.